the day I moved to Willow Creek, Heights felt like stepping into a postcard someone had taped together from a lifetime of suburban sales pitches. The maple trees had just begun to blush. The sidewalks were wide enough to roll a stroller and a grocery cart at the same time. And the streetlights hummed a polite parental glow when night settled in. My name is Marcus Hale, and I had one love that never argued with me, never called when I was late, and never judged my bad takeout choices. My custom matte black McLaren. That car was my private cathedral, the place where I let engines and silence equal therapy. I treated the neighborhood like it deserved to be treated. I never drove faster than 10 miles per hour once I crossed the gated post. I never cranked music so loud it woke the kids. I watched her on Saturdays, not to show off, but because care matters. So when the first note appeared under my windshield wiper like a crucifix of ink and paper, calling out my car as a dangerous menace and ordering me to remove it within 14 days for the safety and quiet of our community, I laughed. I folded the scrap and placed it in a binder labeled Karen Chronicles, which I kept more as a curiosity than a dossier. I laughed because the author typed in a way that made her sound like she mattered more than the bylaws. I laughed because there was nothing in the Homeowners Association handbook that mentioned vehicle models or aesthetics. I even joked about it with my neighbor across the drive, a school teacher named Maya who had more empathy than a crisis hotline. We both shrugged and went on with our evenings, unaware that the paper under my wiper was a match. And Karen had been carrying a can of gasoline for weeks waiting for the right breeze. By the 15th morning, laughter curdled into something colder. I opened my front door with the travel mug still warm and saw my matte black pride reduced to a tableau of ruin. Windows gaped like missing teeth. Paint lay along the asphalt like skin scraped off a story. Tires were punctured with the sort of spite that takes time. Someone had not merely vandalized my car, they had composed a symphony of destruction. For a moment I could not breathe. Neighbors trickled out, the morning chorus of murmurs rising like birds startled from a hedge. Maya approached, eyes rimmed with coffee and confusion, and told me, in a voice that shook like an old porch light, that she had seen Karen and a landscaping crew working double time the night before suspiciously close to my driveway tools, clinking. Laughter that sounded rehearsed. Maya had called the police, then maybe cursed herself for not calling sooner. I did not scream. I did not sob. I stood in the stillness because underneath the shock was a slow, cold realization that felt stranger than any physical hurt. This had not been random. It had been personal. I had a porch camera because I had learned in an old life that people do bad things when they think no one is watching. The footage unspooled with the terrible clarity of accusation. There was Karen in her floral robe, the one she wore like a sash of self-importance, swinging a hammer with the contradictory glee of someone washing dishes and someone performing the demolition of a life. She spoke out loud, as if to an audience of one, calling my car a threat to children and a symbol of reckless wealth. She smashed with the righteous precision of a sermon. She did not hide. She wanted me to see. That was the worst part. I saved the file. I called a lawyer named Sarah Rivera who smelled of purpose, and I wrapped the footage in a calm that had nothing to do with the interior of my chest. The next steps were procedural, cold, and judicial, but the wound was personal and smoldering. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood divided like a town in a novel about civility gone wrong. Karen began a campaign that used the internet of our small community like a trumpet. She sent messages, each more venomous than the last, painting me as a reckless driver, a showy danger, a social call to arms that used children and fear like props on a stage. She called the neighborhood watch meetings and narrated a tale where she was the last line of defense against moral decay, disguised as automobile engineering. Her emails were full of capitalized warnings and the sort of moral urgency that convinces only those predisposed to believe in single causes. I stayed quiet as the legal counsel picked apart her claims with evidence that read like a map of her unraveling story. I had decibel logs proving the car had never been noisier than a refrigerator. GPS traces showing I had never exceeded 10 miles per hour inside our gates. And testimonies from neighbors who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by endorsing a lie. Yet Karen escalated. She started parking herself outside my house for hours, hands on hips, staring in a way that wanted to take from me whatever it meant to be unbothered. The most chilling thing was how she recruited people by stitching moral rhetoric to personal vendettas. She even convinced the landscaping crew to show up at odd hours under the guise of community maintenance. And their involvement later proved to be a braid of negligence and complicity. I filed a civil suit for property damage and harassment and waited, all the while watching Karen perform her role as persecutor with a zeal that suggested she believed she was beyond consequence. Court days have a way of compressing shame into legalese and spectacle. Karen arrived in the courthouse with a stack of grainy photos and a posture that said she expected applause for descending into lawlessness on behalf of public safety. She had no counsel. She had instead prepared a speech, full of metaphors about children and speed and the corrosive effect of showing off, as if the wheel under my hands was a blight. When the prosecutor, who wore neutral patience like a uniform, asked whether she was admitting to the destruction of the car, Karen smiled and said, without a twitch of remorse, that she had neutralized an imminent threat. That sentence landed in the room like the last bell of a failed chapel. My lawyer presented the footage, high-resolution frames that showed the swing of the hammer, the laughter, the words she spoke to the darkness. We had emails where she spread falsehoods across every inbox in the subdivision, calling me an urban racer and a menace. Witnesses testified to her harassment and to the mood she brought, an atmosphere of intimidation she cultivated, like a garden of thorns. The judge, an older woman who had the patience of someone who had seen hundreds of human moral collapses, read the evidence and then rendered a simple, devastating line. Karen was found liable for full restitution for the vehicle, plus additional damages for emotional distress and harassment. The sentence was procedural in its language but volcanic in consequence. Karen's face, that morning, was a study in perception faltering against reality. She was forced to reconcile her self-righteousness with the law, and the law made her pay. The aftermath was a landscape of small humiliations and large reckonings. Karen had not anticipated the ripple effect of accountability. She was removed from her position with the homeowners association, a vote that read like a neighborhood exhalation. Her financial world crumpled under the weight of replacement costs, legal fees, and fines. She sold a car she loved, her Range Rover, and whispers spoke of second mortgages and strained marriages. The landscaping crew distanced themselves and left messages unreturned. Her social calendar folded like paper. For my part, I accepted the judgment, collected the check, and ordered a new car. It arrived 2 weeks later. The same matte black silhouette that people who know these things can identify from a heartbeat. I had a small flourish, added custom red calipers, and the stitched word "Thanks, Karen" tucked in a way only I would notice. I drove it through the neighborhood the first weekend after the ruling at precisely 10 miles per hour. Windows up, a playlist low and private, and listened to the neighborhood breathe around me. Karen stood in her yard, watering a bed of roses she had always tended like a crown. Eyes hollowed in a way that felt like someone finally discovering the consequence of being unrelentingly cruel. The final humiliation, perhaps, was that she never once offered a bona fide apology that acknowledged harm. Her apologies were thin as receipts. I installed new cameras, because caution is a friend. I framed her original complaint and the still from the footage where she raised the hammer, placed them in my garage as a reminder of what happens when moral absolutism becomes cruelty. The story circulated beyond Willow Creek Heights like a cautionary tale told at neighborhood barbecues and in online threads about entitlement. People asked me whether justice felt sweet. I would say it felt like the slow reassembly of a quiet life, like putting a new piece of art on a wall that had been scuffed. It felt like teaching a community that titles and zealotry do not equate to right. Karen had wanted to be judge, jury, and executioner. The law reminded her she was a citizen, fallible and bound by the same rules as the rest of us. The hammer she wielded carried the heft of her unraveling. And in the end, the neighborhood relearned a lesson, ones that are easy to forget when comfort numbs. Compassion, vigilante, righteousness is not bravery. It is cowardice dressed up in a robe.